Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, Catskill Mountain Homebody. My name's Amy. I'm here with my two friends. Let me show you. This is Chipper and Scouty. It's very exciting. Chipper and Scout are very excited to be back with a new video. Chipper, just sit, just sit. I need a drink of water. We made it to another weekend. Unfortunately, it's a rainy weekend here in the Catskill Mountains. But that's okay. It's still nice. Actually, the sun's starting to come out. So we're getting a little break in the weather. Perfect day for crock pot chili, which I made this morning. So we're going to have chili for dinner. Rainy days are the best to make crock pot meals, so I don't have to cook tonight. All right, so as you guys know, on my channel, I have, of course, cooking videos on baking, videos on some crafts that I like to do. I have videos from last year's garden, and a lot of videos about living in the Catskill Mountains of New York State. So today I thought I would do a video explaining why we left the state of California and moved to the Catskill area of New York. I have another video up called The 10 Reasons Why I Love Living in the Catskills. And I gave a little backstory there about the move, but I thought I would go into a little bit more detail about why we left California. But it kind of goes back to my grad school days. So I am born and raised in New Jersey. When I was in my teens, early 20s, I really didn't like living in the Northeast because of the weather. I thought it would be much better to live in a warmer climate. So I ended up applying to grad school at West, and I ended up at first Arizona, northern Arizona, and that began 12 years of my living on the West, in the West Coast. So when I first moved out West, my boyfriend came with me, who is now my husband, Joe, and we lived out West for 12 years. We lived in northern Arizona, then we moved to Phoenix for a little bit, then we ended up in the Southern California desert for 8 years. And it's in the desert where we bought our first home, where we were living when we had our son after we got married. Let's talk about why we decided to leave California. That was a tough decision for me. All right, so I'll start by telling you a little bit about our life in California. We moved to the desert of California because I found a good teaching job. And that's where we were living when we got married. Of course, we got married in New York, so we planned the wedding long distance. And then after the wedding, I got pregnant with our son, Julius. So when our son was 2 years old, we bought our first house in the desert. Now, if you know anything about the California desert, in terms of real estate, prices are cheaper than they are as you get closer to the coast or the northern part of California. The California desert, fairly cheap. A first-time home buyer can buy an inexpensive home, a nice home, for a reasonable price. The payoff is that you have to survive the summers and the warm season in the desert, which is not for the faint of heart. And that's one of the reasons why real estate is more affordable in the desert than in other parts of the state. Other parts of the state have more pleasant climate. But I didn't mind the desert heat. I was okay with it. We bought a little house, 3-bedroom house, a ranch house in California, and it was a brand new build, which was nice. Had a little backyard for our son to play. I had a job that I loved, teaching, was a good salary, but there were problems with living in California. So let's go over some of the reasons why we left California. The extreme heat in California was difficult to deal with. I'll give you an example. In the summer, in the desert, there are stretches of time when the daytime temperatures are in the 100 teens. And at night, it only cools to the 80s. Because of the extreme heat, we would have to keep the air conditioning running in our house for a long time. As soon as the air conditioning would cut off, the house would start getting really hot, even in a brand new build house. That's how extreme the heat was in the summer months in the desert. So when we first moved to the desert, we didn't know this, and our electric bill would be hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month. I mean, I remember getting electric bills that were like $800 at one point at the height of summer. So what we ended up having to do was I would teach in the summer for the sole purpose of paying the electric bill. So all the money I would make in the summer would cover the electric bill for the summer month. So that was tough. We did spread out. The electric companies do allow you to spread out your payments over the 12 months so that you pay a set monthly bill, and that way you don't pay the extreme summer electric bills. We didn't do that for a few years. So for a few years, I just taught summer school solely to pay the gigantic electric bills. So now, of course, the other half of the year, the weather is cooler and the electric bills are much lower because you really don't need heat much in the desert, even in the winter. But the electric bill in the summer would be astronomical. So that was something we really didn't like, that you have to deal with because you need air conditioning in the desert in the summer when it's ridiculously hot. So that was one of the things we didn't like about living in the desert in California. Another thing we didn't really like about living in the area of California we lived in was the traffic in the winter. All the snowbirds come to the desert in the winter, and that's where they spend their winters. So the traffic in the Coachella Valley is really, really bad all winter. And I'm not just talking about on the highway. I'm talking about all the back roads, constant traffic, constant backup. To get 10 miles, it takes you 25 minutes, even longer. So that was another headache of living in the desert, was the winter traffic. A few other things you have to get used to when living in the desert is how hot your car gets in the summer months. Even just putting your seatbelt on, your seatbelt would be on fire. You could burn yourself with your seatbelt in the summer months in the desert. Grocery shopping was a challenge. You know, buying anything that was cold in the desert in the middle of summer and trying to get it to your house without it melting was very difficult. We actually ended up buying a cooler and putting our groceries in a cooler for the drive home because of the extreme temperatures, to try to keep the eggs cool and the milk cool. So that was a pain. The summer is challenging living in the desert. In some ways, it's a little bit more challenging than dealing with the snow on the East Coast. And the snow has challenges also, but the desert heat is really extreme. And I'll give you another example. In the summer, if there was a power outage, you couldn't stay in your home. We would have to get in the car and drive around because the house would be unbearably too hot to be in when the power went out. And forget about saving the food in your fridge. Unless you have a little generator that you can run to keep your fridge going, all your food's going to go bad in your fridge pretty quickly when it's 117 degrees outside. When the power went off in the summer, it was just the absolute worst. And I do remember one day in the Coachella Valley, and this is in the early 2000s, our power went out all night, no air conditioning. And our house was like 90 degrees, even with the windows open. It was just because the summer temperatures are so hot there. So that was one of the most miserable nights of my life. I couldn't sleep at all. It was so unbearably hot that we just sweat all night and thank God the power came on the next day, but that was very, very unbearable. When the power goes out in the winter in the Catskills, yes, it's cold, but your house actually is insulated enough to keep the heat in for much longer than it keeps the cool in when it's miserably hot outside. So, and we've lost power in the Catskills in the winter, and my husband we get a little generator, we hook up a heater, and we stay in one room, and it's been fine. It's never been extreme. And again, that's because, the Catskill weather isn't as extreme as the California weather. The temperatures in the California desert are very extreme in the summer. The Catskill temperatures aren't extreme in the winter. Yeah, they're cold, but we don't have like below 0 temperatures Fahrenheit here. It's 30 in the winter, maybe 32 during the day. So, yeah, you lose power in the winter. It doesn't take that much to make the house warm enough for you to, at least one room, to be 60 degrees. So it's not that extreme. But yeah, it was very extreme in the California desert. So that was one thing we didn't like, was the air conditioning bill and dealing with the summer weather and the extreme heat for half the year in California. I put the puppies down for their nap so I could have time to finish this video in the living room. A few other things we didn't like about living in California. I'll mention two more things. One thing doesn't have anything to do with the state of California, because you can find this in many states, but we lived in a community in California that had an HOA, a homeowners association. So for those of you who don't know, an HOA is pretty much like a committee that oversees a neighborhood and makes sure that the neighborhood is maintained in a certain way, that the people are, that there's a uniformity to the neighborhood, that everyone is keeping up with their property on the neighborhood. And there are rules you have to follow if you live in an HOA community. And the house we bought in California wasn't an HOA, which we didn't like. And we didn't know, because we never lived in an HOA before in our whole lives, what it meant to live in an HOA. But what it means to live in an HOA is that you can't just do what you want on your property. For example, when we first moved in, my husband put up a bug light in the backyard, because there are a lot of nasty bugs in the desert of California. The neighbor behind us, who was an older man, complained to the HOA that we shouldn't have a bug light up because it's shining in his window. And the HOA sent us a letter saying we were going to be fined if we didn't take the bug light down. So we took the bug light down, and right from then on, we said we're never living in an HOA community again, and we never have. We don't really want the neighborhood telling us what we can and can't do on our property. And now we own our own house on 40 acres of land, and nobody tells us what to do. If we want to put 50 bug lights up in the backyard, nobody's going to care or complain. And even if they did, there's no HOA to enforce anything here, which is great. So that part of living in California we didn't like. Again, that's not a California thing. That's just an HOA thing. You could have an HOA in any state. Many states have HOAs. It's not a new thing. So for us, the HOA didn't work out. So we never wanted to buy another HOA community. The last thing I'll mention about California, especially the area of California we lived in, as we perceived it as East Coast people. You know, my husband and I are from the East Coast. I'm from Jersey. My husband's from Long Island. And we have Northeast mentality. So living in Southern California, we started to notice we didn't really fit in that well in that particular area of California. So if you don't know, the Coachella Valley has a lot of affluent neighborhoods. We weren't affluent. I mean, we were living on pretty much a teacher's salary, mainly. But a lot of people in the area were very affluent, and not necessarily old money, but a lot of new money, especially in the early 2000s. A lot of people who were making their money in real estate. Real estate was like that bubbling at that time, and a lot of people were making money in real estate. There was a lot, we felt, this is just my opinion, we felt in that particular area was a lot of materialism. Everything was about the show, right? Everything was about the name brands and the cars, the special cars people drove, and the huge diamonds that women wore. Now, you might wonder, well, how, if you were busy working, how did you even know like what people were doing? It really came through when my son started preschool, and we started to meet the other parents in this particular preschool. And of course, my son would get invited to birthday parties, and we would start to, get to know some of the parents. We would drive to like events at the preschool. And, my husband and I weren't very wealthy at the time. And we drove a Ford minivan. That was our main car, which was breaking down constantly, always had problems. Not the prettiest of cars. We didn't have any fancy cars. I didn't wear designer clothes. I worked, so I didn't have the luxury of like wearing a tracksuit and going to the gym all day. Like I had to go to a job. We weren't, and we didn't really care. Like Joe and I never really cared that much about like the showy materialism. Like I just didn't care about it. So I really didn't feel, Joe and I both really didn't feel like we fit in that circle of people. I never shook that. We lived there for several years, and I always had this outsider feeling like these weren't my people, and I was never going to really, these weren't people that I genuinely would have or wanted to spend time with, because it was all about the show and all about the superficial materialism. Now that's just my experience. I'm not saying every place in the desert was like this, but the place we lived in particular was this bubble of materialism. And so that was awkward, a little bit awkward for Joe and I. All right, so why did we decide to leave? Because, we had a nice house. I had a nice job. My son, seemed fairly happy. He was 2, 3, 4 at the time we were living in the desert. He seemed fine. So why did we leave? Why did we give up everything we had built there and move to the Catskills? 2 people in our family got sick with cancer. My grandmother, who was in her 80s at the time, got cancer. And then my husband's mother, my mother-in-law, was diagnosed with cancer. And that was the last straw when my mother-in-law was diagnosed with cancer. Joe never liked the desert. He lived there for me, pretty much. I liked it much more than he did. I liked the weather. He didn't like the heat. And he really missed the snow and like the seasons. But when his mom got sick, he really didn't want to live out west anymore. It was too far away from everyone. And we also felt that Julius was missing out on seeing our family because all our family was in the Northeast. And so we made the decision to sell our house. I looked for jobs on the East Coast, close proximity to, the New York City area, because that's where our family is. And we decided to give up everything. Give up my job. I had tenure. I gave up tenure. Had to start from scratch. When you give up tenure, you're literally going back to ground zero and building up tenure again. So I was giving up tenure, was giving up a good salary. We were giving up our brand new house that we had only bought 2 years earlier for the sake of family. And that's the main reason why we left California in the early 2000s. So the interesting thing about when we decided to move, we put the house for sale. It wasn't going well. The market wasn't hot for sellers. It really was a buyer's market. And we wanted a certain amount for the house, which we weren't getting. And the house sat for a little bit. In the meantime, I'm sending out applications for teaching jobs all over the Northeast. And I'm thinking, well, wherever we go, we go. And the interesting thing is that I had an interview with this school in the Catskills, in this area. And the phone interview went well. They invited me to come to a face-to-face interview. They were shocked when I said yes from California. I flew to New Jersey, stayed at my parents' house, drove up to the Catskills for the interview. Great interview, right? I stayed here for like a week vacationing with my family, flew home, got a call, and this is really freaky. I get a call from the school in the Catskills that I've been offered the job, and the same week that I found a job in New York, we got an offer on our house. When we had nothing for months and months and months. No offers, nothing. But in the same week, I found a job and our house sold. So within a month, I'm packing my life, scrambling. So this all happened in the late spring. It happened in like June of the year. And I was going to start school in the end of August. Oh, so that was a crazy summer. That's the story of how we ended up leaving California and coming to the New York Catskills, which Chipper was very happy about. I mean, come on, let's face it. This kid is happy. So, oh my goodness, Chipper, you're so hyper. As you can see, the pups are up from their nap. So collectively, those are all the reasons why we decided to move to the Catskills and leave California. That's just our personal story. I think it was for the best. We ended up buying a nice home in the Catskills. Julius enjoyed his childhood. He really loved his school. He has lifelong friends now from here. He got a good education, but the most important thing is that he grew up seeing his family and especially his grandparents. So he was able to grow up and really know all of his grandparents and his cousins and aunts and uncles. So I think it was the best decision for us to leave California and move closer to family to the East Coast. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. If you want to see more videos on the Catskills, I'll link some of my other videos that I've made in the description of this video. These puppies are so crazy. Look at these two boys. Look at them. They're so silly. You're just so silly. Scout. Okay. You don't have to fight. Anyways, I was saying I'll link the other videos on the Catskills that I've made in the description of this video. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.